Perfect. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Olivia Tuchten. I am from Prometheum Carbon. We are a part of the team that has been developing the inclusive carbon standard in partnership with Food and Trees for Africa. We have been developing this carbon program for quite some time now, since around about 2017. And we're very excited by the launch this year. That being said, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And there's a lot of inputs that we would really like to have from audiences like yourselves in terms of identifying where there are concerns about the principles and procedures, perhaps in terms of the inclusive carbon standard, and also your interests and your desires for what you want to get out of such a carbon program. And that's really what we are expecting from these sessions, is to get your feedback, your input, so that we can improve the platform and improve principles where they need to be improved. So I'm going to hand over to, I think, Philip, Serena from our team, and then we can hand over to Simone from Food and Trees.
Thanks, Olivia. My name's Philip Grains. I'm part of the Prometheum team. I've been working on the development of the platform from the technical side. I think my participation here will be to learn and see where we may be able to make improvements to the platform. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarina Jordan. I'm also from Prometheum Carbon. I've been involved for almost a year now, and my focus is predominantly on methodology development, but I do get involved in the other areas as well. So with the amount of interest that we've been getting for people and companies coming onto the platform and developing methodologies, my hope is really that we'll also be reciprocating that with getting some auditors registered in the platform to really get momentum on it. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Simone Ratnam. I'm from the Food and Trees for Africa team. My role in the standard has been stakeholder engagement, liaison, and comms. Maybe my hope for these sessions is to build a community of auditors and methodology developers for the standard.
Cool. Thanks, Simone. And I see we have two independent parties here today, so maybe if I can kick off with alphabetically with Hava. I know you were at the previous session. Hava, if you can just please remind us who you are, where you're from, and what you're looking for here. Hava, if you're there, you may be on mute. Well, then I'm going to jump to Jackie.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, hi.
I'm here. Yes.
Great.
I am working at Ricardo as a certification manager assistant. Thank you for the sessions.
Great. Thanks. Jackie, over to you.
Hi, I'm Jackie Pastoral. I think I know quite a few of the Prometheum team. I do work with two project developers at the moment, and I am hoping to learn a little bit more about the auditing role and what we could be doing better in order to make sure that our information is compliant, but also to get involved on the auditing side.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jackie. Okay. Let's jump into the session. Again, please jump in if you have any questions. I can't see your hand. I know Simone and Philip and Serena will be monitoring. Sometimes I can see the hands. It depends on the view, but it's always a bit of a mystery to me how that works. Just shout. We really want this to be as interactive as possible. We want to have engagement on it. There are no questions that cannot be asked. There are no areas that we can't discuss. So we'd absolutely want this to be a discussion, more than just a one-way communication streets. And hi, Essen, welcome. We have just started. Maybe before we do start, Essen, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a brief introduction to yourself. I know you attended the last sessions and maybe some before that, but if you can just let us know again what it is that you're looking for from these types of sessions and a new carbon program.
I'm Esentinala. I'm the certification manager of Recarbon. We are a validation verification body and under many standards. And we would like to learn about your standards so that we can decide we will attend it, we will apply for it. That's our purpose. Thank you. We would like to also learn about the requirements as well. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Essen. Okay, let me share my screen. I think that this session is going to be somewhat shorter than the previous one. Can you see my screen, or do you see my notes as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Screen.
Excellent, excellent. Technology is working with me today. I don't know if that is fighting words, but welcome again to everybody. This is the second session of our training and information sharing sessions aimed specifically at the auditing community. We had the first session earlier this week on Monday, where we went through the principles, scopes, roles of auditors as well. So this session is intended to build on that introduction, if I can call it that, and to look a little bit more at the details of what we require in terms of the actual auditing processes under the inclusive carbon standard. The following session next week is going to be even more detailed. It's going to really take a deep dive into how to make actions and outcomes on the ICS online platform. And I think that will be really useful in terms of getting an idea of how to register on the system, who can do what on the system, what are the roles and the permissions, what can you see, what actions can you implement on that system. But before we go into that, it's a good idea to know what it is that we expect auditors to do from a high level. The next 3 sessions of this auditor workshops and training sessions, they will really be very, very practical applications. So by that stage, we do hope that you will have registered on the system, at least to start having an idea of how to navigate. But when it comes to these practical sessions, I think that we will be providing additional logins for our development site, where we will ask you to go in, register on the development site, perform the functions that we think that you would need to do. So that I think will be very, very exciting. So please do attend those training schedules as well. And of course, these sessions will be recorded. And at any time, if you have any queries, you are please welcome to send us an email. We'll definitely come back to you on any questions. In terms of what we are looking at today, we are focusing on the content of our audit manual. And this is intended as a guide to the auditing community and also obviously to project developers. And it really is the background and the further information on the various auditing requirements underneath the inclusive carbon standard. So importantly, we do have a manual, and we would greatly appreciate any inputs, questions, queries, areas for improvement that you might have on the manual, and we'll let you know where to find that manual on the Inclusive Carbon Standard website. We'll briefly go through the structure of the manual. some of the key themes in terms of auditing under the Inclusive Carbon Standard, because as I tried to emphasize earlier in the week, the auditing requirements under the Inclusive Carbon Standard are specifically streamlined because we believe that the various tools and new processes that we have in place allow for reduced time and effort in developing a carbon project and component methodologies as well. And what we would like to see is, over time, a direct related reduced time and effort required by auditors. Our aim is to make the process and the elements clear, simple, so that it reduces some of the barriers that we are accustomed to in this market in terms of getting projects registered as carbon projects and getting the emission reductions certified or issued or verified in that regard. So the Inclusive Carbon Standard really does take a little bit of a different approach to many of our legacy carbon programs and standards. And that's what we're hoping to acquaint you with today, as well as in these other sessions that we are holding. We will definitely today look at some details of the audit processes, and that's with regards to the auditing requirements to approve a component methodology, and also the auditing processes and requirements in order to validate a project registration or verify the carbon credits that arise from a project registration. So you can find our manual on this link. Simone, if at all possible, if it would be possible to drop that link into the chat, that would be wonderful. But you will be able to find all our other publicly available guidance documents, standard related documents, terms of reference, those kind of documents on the Inclusive Carbon website, which is app.inclusivecarbon.org, and the audit manual will be there, as well as these other documents. Please feel free to comment on the audit manual, any of the other documents as well. So, what is in the manual? This is the high-level table of contents of the manual. You'll get an introduction. You will get all the requirements for accreditation. So if you want to know what you need to provide to whom, the chapter 2 will be a good place to go. As mentioned in the last session, there is no cost for auditor accreditation. So we are hoping that is an incentive to make you part of our community. Chapter 3 outlines some of the processes in using the ICS, the Inclusive Carbon Standard online platform. And then chapter 4, 5, 6, 7, really, they go into a lot of the details of the processes and the requirements of auditing under the Inclusive Carbon Standard. And there are 3 main areas of auditing requirements. There's the auditing requirements for the approval of component methodologies. Then again, there are the usual auditing requirements for a validation of a project registration and the verification of carbon credits. And then there, obviously, we do have some requirements in terms of compliance and ethics. And that's also an important part of our program. We want to reduce the time and the effort and the cost involved in registering carbon credits and carbon credit projects and issuing carbon credits, but we're not prepared to sacrifice the integrity. And that's where the auditing community plays such an incredibly vital role. Auditors are the gatekeepers in many respects. They are the entities that make sure that the projects are registered according to the specifications of the ICS rules, and that includes the ICS standard as well as the audit manual. So it's very important that that projects are developed in a way that's accurate, transparent, credible, that's consistent, that's all of those good things that I'm sure the auditing community is incredibly well familiar with by now. Couple of key themes that we'd like to touch on again, that we did go into some detail in the previous session earlier this week, and I believe there is a recording available of that session, and perhaps the presentation is already online as well. But as I've mentioned, our aim is to scale up the registration of carbon credit projects and the issuance of carbon credits. We think that this is an incredibly important requirement if we are to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is to ensure that global temperatures do not go higher than 2 degrees, or preferably less than 2 degrees, compared to the average temperatures that were prevalent in the pre-industrial revolution times. We're happy to talk about discussions about the criticisms of the role that carbon offsets play in the journey to making sure that our world decarbonizes. There are many critics who say that carbon credits are hot air, that it's a license to pollute. Very, very happy to have those discussions. In simply put, I think there obviously problems with some carbon credit projects, some carbon credits themselves, but those problems shouldn't be used to completely tarnish the entire sector. The use of carbon offsets has enormous benefit for countries and communities. They represent least cost mitigation measures, and they should be used accordingly with the whole suite of decarbonization activities. And then it's very important that the auditors must take cognizance of the requirements to have accurate, complete project documents. We call our project documents project reports and monitoring reports. A project report, as an auditor, this is the equivalent of a project design document or a project description in the language that's used by some of the legacy carbon programs. Significantly, the project reports that come out of the Inclusive Carbon Standard, these are auto-generated templates that project developers complete. And we believe that this mechanism will allow for the speedier upload of information, the speedier generation of these reports, and will also limit human error and potentially fraud. Another key principle of the Inclusive Carbon Standard is the ability to use technology to our advantage. It recognizes that the world now so advanced that most of the things that we do are already on the internet, and that applies to meters as well. So any smart meters, any Internet of Things linked devices, this carbon programs makes provision for those very specifically within our key structure. And the aim is to automatically collate and capture data sets so that these can be automatically represented in for instance, a monitoring report. Again, and we feel that that will limit the time and effort required to develop a monitoring report, and it will limit the potential for human error, as well as fraud where that is prevalent. There are certain eligibility requirements for our auditors, and we do expect that auditors must be accredited with a body that is affiliated with the International Accreditation Forum. And just to give you some examples of these types of bodies, in South Africa, it would be our South African National Accreditation System Service, I forget the S, but SANAS is our body that is the IAF affiliated body. In India, it's the National Accreditation Board for Certification Bodies. The Germans have one, the UK has one, the Americans, and there are more. We would very much like accreditation to be aligned with the ISO 14065 standard on auditing carbon projects. However, we do recognize that those certifications are actually fairly rare, certainly in the South African environment. And as an interim measure, we would certainly accept accreditation with some of the established legacy carbon programs. These include the VCS, the CDM, which will transition to the Article 6.4 mechanism, as well as the gold standard. Importantly, auditors must complete training. We are in the process of formalizing exactly what that means. There was a talk in the last session about how will there be a test. We haven't quite yet figured that out. However, these types of sessions that we are running now, these are the types of training sessions that we would expect auditors to attend and also demonstrate that they have an understanding of the content that has been presented here. The reason for this is that there are a number of new elements that we are proposing in the inclusive carbon standard. In many ways, there are fairly material differences in the inclusive carbon standard compared to the approaches that have been taken in some of our legacy and well-established carbon programs. For example, one of the major changes is the use of simplified component methodologies. In many ways, these simplified component methodologies are very modular in nature. You need to have a number of different component methodologies to be able to register a carbon project. As we discussed in the previous session, some of the barriers that we have experienced and that are well recognized in the global carbon markets is the enormous technological barrier, but not technological, it's the enormous barrier of registering a carbon credit project related to the complexity and the lengthy nature of consolidated methodologies. What we want to do is break up those methodologies and make them very, very specific to technology measures, to specific project requirements or circumstances, so that there is no need for a project developer and a respective auditor to navigate all the complexities of clauses and paragraphs and requirements that have got nothing to do with the project at hand. Some of these methodologies can be 80 to 100 pages long. And that's because their scope is so broad that they're trying to cater for every possible option. And we have found that that's one of the enormous barriers to registering a carbon project. It's difficulty in navigating the technical language, and it becomes so complex and so broad that it takes a lot of time, effort, and that always means money at the end of the day and risk. So we're trying to really reduce that burden through these modular types of component methodologies. Also importantly, the development of these methodologies and the finalization of these methodologies happens on the Inclusive Carbon Standard online platform. Methodologies are developed with certain fields that project developers would need to complete when it comes time for the project developer to generate a project report or a monitoring report. And that means that the templates for these documents, a project report or a monitoring report, these are automatically generated by the system because they are 100% linked to the component methodology. So this really reduces the uncertainty that many project developers have, which is, what is being asked of me when I'm asked to complete a certain section in a project report or a monitoring report? Am I putting in the right info here? It's, they give the the subheadings like, you know, project details or project description or location. And often there's guidance to say, okay, you must include a map. Okay, you must tell us where it is. But what we want to do is make our component methodologies so specific that it will say, please include a map in an HTML format or a JPEG format or a whatever format. And then the next field is, please include the GPS coordinates. It's that kind of specification that we believe will really reduce the complexity and the uncertainty when it comes to developing these types of documents. The other key point is that if there are methodologies and associated projects that use smart technology, these in IoT devices, that the data can be automatically pulled into the system. And that really is a novel approach to developing these types of projects. And we think that it requires a bit of a novel approach in terms of auditing. Obviously, there needs to be confidence in the underlying data sets, and there needs to be independent checking of those data sets. But we do believe that this capability of the systems will reduce the time and effort when it comes to developing a monitoring report, for instance, and therefore we hope that it will reduce the time and effort when it comes to auditing the monitoring report. There is obviously the provision for manual data sets where not all projects are suited to smart devices that are linked to the Internet of Things. Some projects are better suited to manual entries, and that will obviously still be allowed for under the carbon, the inclusive carbon standard. And there will be the ability to upload Excel spreadsheets, supporting documents in very much the same format that maybe the auditing community is already familiar with. The key is that it all happens on the inclusive carbon standard platform. One of the other things that we touched on in the previous sessions, and we can discuss at length if required, is another project and auditing shift, if we can call it that. And that is to use principles that we have called landmark values and projects, which is to say that if, for instance, a certain landmark value has been audited already and is approved as a landmark value, that value should be able to be used by project developers in developing their project reports and their monitoring reports, so long as that value is valid. And by valid, I mean each landmark value will have a specific time frame in which it may remain valid. After that, it is not valued. This can be applied, for example, to a grid emission factor that somebody has already developed and taken through the auditing process. Our opinion is, if that process has been followed, if the value has been successfully audited, there is no need for project developers to redo that work, redo the audit. That value stands and is applicable so long as it is valid. So these types of features, again, we think that it will reduce the time and effort that it takes into developing these projects, and we think that there's a direct relation to the time then and effort required by auditors to audit these types of projects. Finally, at the end of the system, if we can call it that, end of this kind of cycle, one of the other key features is the ability of the Inclusive Carbon Standards online platform to automatically calculate emission reductions where these are provided for in the relevant component methodology. And I think it's high time, really, that this feature is in place. Excel is an absolutely wonderful tool, but it is open to slips of the fingers where you can not link something properly, you make a mistake, there's something wrong with your formula, and that is an issue when it comes to your outcomes in terms of emission reductions or emission removals. So where possible and where the component methodologies allow, the ICS online platform will actually calculate the emission reductions based on the inputs that are provided. And we do that using a mathematical language program, which we can get into in more detail as well. So what does that mean? It means that we have reduced the risk of human error when it comes to inputting the data, when it comes to making the calculations. All of those we think will reduce admin burden, time, effort, and hopefully cost. Just to note again that the online platform related to the inclusive carbon standard is really the central structure around which actions happen in this carbon program. It is in particular for auditors. It's the platform where all of the auditing processes and components will be managed. This is where you will be able to approve new component methodologies, and it's where you'll be able to validate projects and verify carbon credits. Again, there is a requirement to adhere to a code of conduct and the principles that we outline in the audit manual. Obviously, there is a requirement to please recuse yourselves from projects where there might be a potential conflict of interest. What does that mean? If any auditors are also involved in the development of a project in some way, these may be potential conflicts of interests, and there is very specific guidance and wording on what this means in the declaration contained in the audit manual. Let's go into a little bit of the audit processes. But before I do that, I just wanted to check in with everybody. Are there any questions or any queries that we should take before we go into the next session?
No questions in the chat so far.
Okay, great. Then thanks, Mwaka. Mwaka, well, can we take this opportunity? We didn't hear from you in the introduction. Would you like to just briefly introduce yourself and tell us what you're expecting from these sessions? Mwaka, you may be on mute. I'm not sure.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mwaka Njogu, working as a manager in the audit practice in Zambia. So what I'm expecting from the session is just to learn about inclusive carbon standards. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to have auditors from the continent as well. Okay, moving on. Audit processes. So there are various responsibilities and obligations that we expect from our auditors. We do expect auditors to understand and know of the project rules and the program rules and requirements that are contained in the Inclusive Carbon Standard documentation, as well as the audit manual and some other subsidiary documents as well. We obviously expect auditors to conduct themselves in a way that is professional and ethical. As part of that, we expect that the reports that are provided should be accurate. They should allow for understanding of what actually happened during the audit process. So they should be transparent, they should be complete. We do hope that auditors can build on the body of knowledge related to greenhouse gas accounting and auditing. We expect that there should be compliance with the accreditation requirements, and notably there is also a requirement for renewal of regular accreditation at various intervals. I think it's every 5 years. Can double check that. There is also a requirement to cooperate with the governance and administrative structures within the inclusive carbon standard, and those include our secretariat, and they also include the members of our Environmental Integrity Committee. And our Environmental Integrity Committee, often abbreviated to EIC, this is supported by a technical subcommittee. And really, they're the highest governing body within the operational environment of the inclusive carbon standard. They are the final body that gives the approval of component methodologies, that gives the approval of project registrations and carbon credit issuances. And they are, as I said, supported by a technical subcommittee, which also are members that have different skills and capabilities compared to the members of the Environmental Integrity Committee. And it's a pool from which the Environmental Integrity Committee can draw expert advice. The use of the platform is absolutely central to the inclusive carbon standard. This is the primary place where auditors, project developers, the secretariat and other members of the governing structures can communicate and interact with each other. So it's absolutely critical that auditors become well acquainted with the ICS platform, how it works, what's needed of them, what can be done on there, what can't be done on there, in order to make sure that the system works effectively and efficiently. The first step that needs to happen is that an auditing company needs to have a account on the Inclusive Carbon Standard online platform, and you do this by registering on the online platform, and through there, that's where the accreditation activities can take place, where auditors can, number one, upload relevant documentation to prove that there is either a certification with an IAF affiliated body or with one of the legacy carbon programs that we have mentioned. It's where that they can upload or add different users underneath the auditing company, and these are users within the auditing company itself. You might have admin personnel who may be responsible for uploading documents. You may have personnel that are responsible for signing off on audits. That's particularly important. You might even have users who you just want to be able to share the information with them, where they won't have any rights on the system to upload or change or approve anything like that. But that is up to the auditing company. We do please recommend check our ICS procedures manual on how to register on the ICS platform. And once registration is complete and you have a component methodology or a project that you have been asked to validate or even verify, all of those actions happen on the platform. That's where project developers can upload documents, where auditors can make comments on certain information that's provided, or documents as well. And that's where the interaction and the communication takes place. And there is a record of every interaction that takes place on the platform between the parties, whether it's an auditor and a project developer or the Environmental Integrity Committee. Those formal communications are recorded on the platform, and there's a history of them. Importantly, we ask that auditors sign a declaration, and that is part of this requirement to commit to conducting yourselves in a professional and ethical manner. And there is a document that we request that auditors sign, and that document is in the Annexure 1 of the audit manual. Very, very briefly, I mean, it says the details in it, but it does want declarations to make sure that there's no conflict of interest, that there's the accreditation requirements are up to date and valid, that there will be compliance with the ICS principles and rules and requirements, that the training program has been complete, among various others. And we take this very seriously, and we request that this declaration be signed in the presence of a Commissioner of Oaths. And then that signed document can be uploaded to the platform as evidence. So there really are three main auditing processes that we wish our auditors to become well acquainted with, so that you can effect the required actions that are needed under these different processes. We envisage that auditors will be involved in the approval of component methodologies where necessary. And where I say where necessary, the approval of component methodologies can also be done by our Environmental Integrity Committee, and if needed, they can get help from the technical subcommittee. So the first port of call is where a methodology developer submits an idea or a draft component methodology. The Environmental Integrity Committee has the first right to say whether they are in a position well qualified enough to audit that particular component methodology. If the Environmental Integrity Committee feels that neither they nor the supporting technical subcommittee have the skills, the capabilities, the resources to approve such a component methodology, that is when they will say to the methodology developer, listen, you have to engage with and employ the services of an accredited auditor. And that's very important. Those contractual arrangements of a methodology developer and the accredited auditors, those contractual arrangements happen outside of the inclusive carbon standard. That's strictly between the accredited auditor and the methodology developer. So auditors would also be responsible for the validation of project registrations and obviously project deviations or that occur during the lifetime of the project that may need to be validated, as well as the verification of carbon credits. And I think really all three of these processes are not new or novel requirements for auditors. And I think there is a lot of established work and knowledge and principles that can be applied here, bearing in mind that we believe that the inclusive carbon standards tools and principles will allow for a reduced amount of time and effort that is needed to develop these three elements, whether it's a component methodology, a project report, or a verification report. And we do believe that the integrity of the underlying documents and outcomes, whether it's the component methodology, project report, or carbon credits that come out of a monitoring report, we do believe that the integrity of those outcomes is not compromised by the tools and measures that we have at hand. If anything, they are increased, especially when it comes to automated collection of information and calculation of emission reductions. So we do expect that there is a bit of a new lens to auditing that is required in these auditing processes. But in many respects, the underlying principles of what they are is the same as in the legacy carbon programs. A validation of a project is when a new project is requesting registration with the inclusive carbon standard. And auditors are requested, please, to make sure that the requesting project meets the rules of the ICS, that it's as articulated in our standard, that it meets the rules of all the component methodologies, whether those component methodologies are related to the baseline or additionality or monitoring. And we do expect then that the auditor follows the usual processes of considering compliance against these requirements and submits a final report after internal technical reviews as they may be needed. And this request for approval then goes through our Environmental Integrity Committee. Perhaps to pause here a moment and talk about what's a bit different in terms of the inclusive carbon standard compared to our legacy carbon programs. And that's the role of the Environmental Integrity Committee in approving the recommendations made by auditors. The Environmental Integrity Committee is not going to re-audit a particular project, whether it's a request for a project registration or a monitoring report issuance or a component methodology. And they will not presume to undertake the auditing functions that auditors have. That is the role of the auditor. Environmental Integrity Committee can raise questions, can flag problems when they see them, but that is where their scope will be limited to. And that's quite different from some of our other legacy programs, which feel that they need to take on the auditing role as well. And we think that that is not pragmatic, because those individuals have not been involved in the entire audit and therefore don't have the experience and the knowledge of what has actually happened during that audit. And that would take away the role of auditors, in our opinion. That's really one of the key elements we'd like to stress in terms of how we wish to make the inclusive carbon standard processes and procedures more streamlined compared to some of the legacy carbon programs. But then to take a moment about what is a project verification, and that's really the assessment of a monitoring report that comes out of an operational project. And same principles apply. Auditors are required to assess the monitoring report against the requirements of the ICS standard, of the audit manual, of any other applicable rules, especially the component methodologies. The final output from the auditors is an audit report, and then that goes to the Environmental Integrity Committee again for approval or queries in that regard. If we dive a little bit deeper into the different processes that are required with the 3 different auditing elements, if we look at the very high level steps that are needed to approve a component methodology, this is a good summary. Obviously, the contracting between the auditor and the developer of the component methodology, that happens outside of the inclusive carbon standard. That's strictly between the parties involved. We don't get involved in that. And obviously, this would only happen if the Environmental Integrity Committee says, hey, we don't have the capabilities or the skills or the knowledge to do this audit. It must go through the audit route. And that's the first step. The methodology developer would then submit or develop and submit the methodology on the inclusive carbon standard platform. The accredited auditor would then be allowed to review the component methodology and again see whether it complies with the rules of the ICS standard. The auditor would be given the provision to make comments on all the clauses and principles in the component methodology and to upload these comments on the inclusive carbon standard platform. Very much the similar route to typical audits. You can raise findings for clarifications. You can raise findings related to corrections, and not in this instance, but in project instances, you could request forward action requests as well. But once these findings are uploaded onto the system, the methodology developer then has an opportunity to close out these findings. And this can be a bit of a process. it's likely that there will be a few rounds of findings where information is submitted to close out findings, and perhaps the auditors have new information requests or query elements in that information provided. And at the end of the process, the auditors will develop an audit report. We expect that that audit report has an internal technical review within the auditing firm. And then that final document, if once all the findings are closed out in that regard, that can go to the Environmental Integrity Committee for approval. Similarly, with a validation audit procedure, contracting again happens outside of the carbon inclusive carbon standard. That's between the parties involved. Similarly to a component methodology development process, a project developer or the appointed representative of a project developer or owner, they will input the fields in the automatically generated project report template on the Inclusive Carbon Standards online platform. They'll also upload all required supporting evidence on that platform, and then the auditor will be able to review the project report as well as the supporting document. Importantly, in a validation of a project registration, auditors are requested, please, to conduct site visits. And this is well aligned with the auditing practices that are currently employed. Perhaps at that point, the auditor will have more queries, more findings, and again, the auditor can make all of these findings on the Inclusive Carbon Standards online platform. So whether it's a request for a clarification, a corrective action, or even a forward action request, and the project owner will then have the opportunity to close out those findings. And again, these things can go backwards and forwards a couple of times, and there might be a couple of iterations until they're all fully closed out. Then the auditor will develop a report that then again goes for an internal technical review within the audit firm. That final report, once all the findings are closed out, that will go to the Environmental Integrity Committee to approve or reject the request for project registration. Very similar process when it comes to the verification process. Contracting happens outside of the Inclusive Carbon Standard. The project developer either has a Internet of Things type of setup where the monitoring report is automatically generated by the Inclusive Carbon Standard platform. And if that's the case, it will have all of the data sets related to the IoT device automatically populated in that monitoring report. It will have the emission reductions that are automatically calculated in that monitoring report. And the auditor will then be able to review that monitoring report on the system. If the project does not involve a smart meter or an Internet of Things device, then information can be uploaded in spreadsheets, similarly to the normal processes that happen in the legacy carbon programs, and auditors can review that information on the system as well. Couple of changes here in terms of what auditors may be used to in the practices with our legacy carbon programs. Site visits. These can be physical or they can be remote site visits as determined in one of two ways. Either a component methodology stipulates that there can either be remote or physical site visits, and that would obviously need to be approved by an Environmental Integrity Committee, or perhaps there is a high risk associated with the project, and auditors will need to do the usual risk assessment before confirming whether a physical or remote site visit is necessary. We really envisage here that the projects that have smart devices that are fairly simple in nature, that don't have a lot of different monitored parameters, we expect that there should be reduced need for physical site visits of those projects. But again, this is something that needs to be clearly investigated, and the results of an assessment need to be clearly articulated in the audit reports. And then once that happens, whether it's a physical or a remote site visit, the process is the same as described for the validation and component methodology approvals. The process of closing out findings happens, and internal technical review of the closed out findings happens, and a final report gets sent to the Environmental Integrity Committee for approval or rejection. Just a couple of more notes really on the requirements for either physical or a remote verification. There will have to be a physical audit if it's required in the component methodology, or if the auditor feels that there is a higher risk associated with that type of project. Where there's low risk, we think that a remote audit should be a valid and reasonable approach. What is low risk? These are projects that have perhaps a strong history of compliance, where there have been successful verifications in the past and very few material findings raised. Perhaps there's a simple project of design. For example, renewable energy projects are typically simpler in their project design and their monitoring requirements than, for example, a land-based project. Reliable data sources, again, we think that Internet of Things and smart meters really represent reliable data sources, and therefore the burden of auditing should be reduced. But if there are remote audits, there needs to be provision for supporting evidence that the information provided is accurate, that it's correct, consistent, transparent, all of those kind of things. So there would be requirements for site maps, aerial photos, outlining physical boundaries, photographs of all monitoring equipment and corresponding documents and data sets. And there does need to be very robust supporting documentation in this regard, whether it is walkthrough on a video device, whether it's Zoom, Teams, that kind of thing, to make sure that the information that is provided is correct and complete and transparent. Another key element of the inclusive carbon standard, which we think will expedite the ability of projects to monetize their carbon credits, is the provision for an automatic verification process. We believe that where certain projects using an activated and valid IoT device or smart meter, they can proceed to automatic verification process without the need for independent auditing by an accredited auditor. This is quite a big statement, and the point is that we believe that if there are conditions in a project where that has been audited previously and no changes in the project monitoring, and particularly related to the IoT device, we believe that there's no need for an auditor to rubber stamp these requirements. There should be a provision for automatic verification in this case. Very importantly, what does it mean to have a valid activated IoT device? So this IoT device needs to be within its calibration period. It means that means it is valid. If it is outside of its calibration period, then it is not valid. Then there's a potential risk that that device may not be measuring in the way that it was intended to measure, and it may be out. So if that is the case, a verification is definitely required by an auditor. However, if this activated IoT device is within the validity period in the monitoring period that the project developer wishes to verify, then nothing has changed. All that's needed is evidence that the IoT device is active and that it is valid. And that should be the provisions for automatic verification. Projects have to undergo the normal verification process. If they don't have an IoT device, then that does require the manual process, which auditors are required to make sure that the equipment in place is monitoring as required, and that the project conditions haven't changed, and that they are being operated in accordance with the ICS rules and the audit manual rules. If there is an IoT device in the project monitoring plan, if it is activated, but if it has been replaced, for instance, in the monitoring period, or it has been calibrated within the monitoring period, you have to have an audit of that. That is non-negotiable. I would like to pause there and ask some of our auditing community, however, perhaps, do you have any comments that you would like to make here? Any insights that you can give on what we're proposing here? However, I'm not sure if you on mute, but you can always reach out to us via email and let us know if you have any questions or any reservations on this. Because I think that's really coming to a close of our session today. Just want to say that there is another session coming up, or another 2 sessions coming up next week. So the next session is going to look at the intricacies of the ICS online platform, how to develop your user profiles, what you can do, what you can't do there, how to navigate, what kind of notifications you're going to receive, what does the dashboard look like, how do you do the actual actions when it comes to approving a component methodology or projects or carbon credits that are requesting verification and issuance. So that is that. If there are any comments, anybody would like to raise a question, please do so. Jackie is, no, I didn't see a hand.
Nothing from my side, Olivia, though.
Okay.
I am still here.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All good, just from an observer point of view.
Okay. Hi, Nikki Palmer. I saw you, didn't see you come in, but welcome.
Yes. Thank you. Sorry, I was in a previous meeting, so I couldn't attend at the beginning, but thank you for your input. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, it's quite a lot to digest. Please read the manuals. Please send questions, comments, where you think that we're not on the right track. We want to know. So maybe until next week, I hope you guys have a very good end to the week, and we can leave it there.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
Simone.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you, Olivia.
Bye.
Bye.